two, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Local Youth Worker, a podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. I'm your host, John Parrott. This is episode number 445, and I'm here with Chris Holland. Chris, how's it going?
Man, it's going great.
It's good to see you. It's been a little while since you've been on the podcast, so I'm glad to have you back on. And Tim Carpenter is joining us on the podcast today. Tim, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me here. Excited to chat with you guys. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, I really appreciate your willingness to come on. We're going to be talking to you about your YouTube channel. We want everybody to check out Everyday Tactical Vids, but also talking about survival and all kinds of things. But Tim, why don't we begin just telling our listeners, this is your first time on the podcast. Tell us where you're joining us from, a little bit about your family, all that good stuff.
Great. Yeah, so I'm living in New Hampshire now. I live on the seacoast of New Hampshire. There's about 22 miles of land that touches the ocean, and I'm about probably 6 miles as the crow flies from the Atlantic, which is really cool. We got the mountains, and we got the ocean as well, which is cool. Grew up in New York, outside New York City in Poughkeepsie, and then ended up at the University of New Hampshire in 2000 for graduate school, and finished my graduate work, and then actually started my doctorate and got kind of bored with what I was doing and shifted into full-time vocational ministry. So worked 4 years with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and then 10 years at a local church as the youth pastor, another 5 or 7 years doing other pastoral ministry. And then about a year and a half ago, my wife and my family and I planted Mercy Church here in our hometown of Newmarket, New Hampshire. So that's been our latest endeavor.
And that's awesome. And it's so cool that when I reached out to you, I had no idea about any of that you were in youth ministry at one point, that you're, in church planning, and you kind of do this YouTube thing on the side. And like I said, we'll get into some of that. I do have to say, we're slowly starting to put these on YouTube. And so if anyone's out there watching this, but for those who aren't, you've got a Star Wars t-shirt on with Boba Fett. So that, and you said you also have a sticker on your truck. So I'm guessing you're a Star Wars fan.
Yeah, it's scary to say that these days because I really like it, but there are professional fans out there. So I like to watch it. I'm just finishing up the first season of The Bad Batch, which I've really enjoyed.
Word.
I'm looking for some stickers of those guys to put on the back of my truck. But there's people out there who they can tell you the middle names of, minor characters. I'm not that guy. I just enjoy the entertainment factor.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good disclaimer. Yeah, you've got to be careful these days, for sure. Well, look, I know this was years ago, and that I saw one of your videos, and I guess maybe even backing up. So sometimes we have some selfish podcasts where we're just kind of doing some that we want to do. And anyone who knows me a little bit knows that I like pocket knives. But I'm not an expert on something that we'll talk about, EDC. For those of you out there who don't know EDC, that's everyday carry. Chris is one of those experts, and I don't know if Tim would call himself an expert, but I would say he's an expert as well on just kind of survival, EDC gear, all of that. But I remember, Tim, I was watching one of your videos. This was a while back, and I think you were reviewing some kind of backpack or a bag. And as you were kind of talking about the bag, you opened it up, and I think I saw a copy of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity in there.
Probably, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, maybe this guy, he's a believer. And so I kind of kept up with you from then, and then not too long ago reached out to you and wanted to just kind of connect with you and have you on here. And so maybe just let's back up before the YouTube channel, all that, just interest in survival, camping, all that kind of stuff. How did this start for you in your life?
Yeah, I think, probably like a lot of kids, if your family's into it, then you get into it too. So I wouldn't say my family was hardcore outdoorswomen, but we did canoeing and camping and fishing and things like that. And then honestly, what happened was my senior year, I was dating a young woman who loved to read, and I did not like to read at all. I was just keep me away from the books, but she wanted to go to Barnes and Noble. I went to Barnes and Noble and I found a book about survival, and then I fell in love with reading. And so now I love books and I love reading, but it really started because I was like, hey, look, here's something I can read and I'm not bored with it. And so I'm definitely, I tend to have an independent streak. And so rather than go into a survival class, I just read the book, wandered out into the woods and said, I'm going to start figuring out how to do this. And there were definitely multiple times where outside of the providence and the grace of God, I should probably be dead for a variety of different survival scenarios. But just really started to love learning about how to survive in the woods. And then I was in college at Ithaca College in Central New York, and right next door was Cornell University, huge outdoor program. And they were looking to hire somebody to teach survival skills. And that's a pretty small market as far as people in the town who could teach it. So I reached out and said, hey, I'd love to do this. And so I'm trying to think, it was 2, 3, maybe max 4 semesters, but I taught that class with a couple other people. Then kind of faded out of it a little bit as I pursued my education. And then just a handful, probably 10 years ago, kind of got back into the survival, outdoor, everyday carry world. And I've been doing it for, I think I'm just over about 10, 11 years now doing the YouTube thing. So,
yeah. Well, I was going to say, I did look on YouTube and it said, I think it says, member since October 14th, 2012. So I don't know if that's when you posted your first video or if you were just kind of getting on. So, I mean, that's a while that you've been doing this.
Yeah. I was in my apartment kitchen, no special lighting, no special mic, an old, pretty bad digital camera that had a video feature. And I think it was the Benchmade Griptilian. It was my first pocket knife I ever reviewed. And I had spent $90 on that, which, as you know, especially when you're starting out in youth ministry, that's like most of your year's salary at that point, So
that's your mortgage payment.
But exactly. I was like, dear Lord, please bless this effort I'm putting in here. So, yep.
Nice. Well, yeah. And I mean, here you are now, you've got over 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. And I looked, there's 1,784 videos that you've posted. Were you aware that it's that many videos?
Yeah, I did get into a streak a couple of years ago where I was able to just turn things around really quick. And I was like, this feels like a lot of videos I'm putting out. And when I looked, I was like, wow, that is a lot of videos. So I knew it was a bunch. I didn't know. That's coming up on 2,000 now. That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess just curious too. I mean, Chris, you and I have talked about EDC stuff and knives and all of that. But where did your passion begin with that?
Me? Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up on a farm in Alabama, I think you just always have to have a tool on your side. And I mean, when Leatherman came out, or when I became aware of Leatherman, I just fell in love. And my dad owned a electrical contracting company. And one of the years he gave as gifts to his clients was this Leatherman with like his work logo on the side. I was like, Dad, can I have one of those, please? And he's like, well, yeah, I got like 50 of them in a box. Business hasn't been good. So I just grew up with a box of Leatherman. And I don't know what year it was. That first iteration of Leatherman is worth a lot of money. Now.
Oh yeah.
But I've never been able to find that box again. But I grew up just going through those Leatherman out in the field with people and cousins and stuff. And then I think as of like the last, I don't know, John, when we started talking about EDC, it was at RYM Colorado. I think I saw you with a Gerber, and I was like, hey, I know that knife. And we started talking about it, and because it was, I guess back then it was like, you're kind of weird if you're into EDC, like you care about knife steel and you care about these things. Now it's kind of like, hey man, I'm kind of cool because I care about this stuff, and youth care about it. And I mean, I don't know how many kids, especially the boys, they want to see what my pocket check is, and they want to, find out. And I don't know. I think it was just something I've enjoyed. I really care about high quality things. I care about things that I can give to my children one day. I care about, I think the Lord is worshiped and given glory when we really say, Lord, thank you for, S30VN steel or whatever. Thank you for Chris Reed's work in that. Thank you for just giving us the gift of blade retention. Like I think that's a beautiful thing, really. But I'm weird.
Yeah. We're gonna find out how many of our listeners are into this kind of thing, or if they aren't. So as we get kind of technical here, but But yeah, so Tim, I'm curious too, as you're, getting into this, and that's so cool to hear that you, I mean, one, I hated reading when I was growing up, and it wasn't until later in life where the Lord gave me a desire to read, but just how those kind of came together. But when did you first think, okay, I want to start a YouTube channel for this? I want to start kind of trying to churn something out. Because again, back in 2012, that's still kind of new. And so, yeah, just curious how that began.
Yeah, it was definitely a circuitous journey. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with airsoft. It's sort of similar to paintball.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So I've got a group of buddies. I wear my wedding ring for my bride, and I wear this other ring that there's 7 of us. We got tagged as the Sovereign Seven. So every year, this group of 7 of us get together. Active church members, elders, pastors, missionaries, different places in life and ministry. But every year we get together for a gathering just to study scripture together, pray, have a good time playing out in the woods. And one year, one of the guys was like, "Hey, everybody bring $15." And we said, "For what?" He's like, "Don't ask questions, just bring $15." So he went out to Walmart and bought everybody an airsoft spring pistol. And so we were running through the woods like a bunch of junior high kids, maybe not even junior high kids, elementary school kids, shooting each other. It was just a ton of fun. And I started to be like, is this like a thing? And so I jumped on the internet, went down the rabbit hole, found out this is a huge world.
Mm-hmm.
In New England, there wasn't a ton of people who were doing media on this. And so I listened to a podcast and I thought, I'm going to start an airsoft podcast. And so I got connected to a bunch of companies and said, hey, if you send me gear, I'll promote it. I'll talk about it. And because of that, there was sort of an overlap of it's a game, it's fun, but also people like to buy this military gear. And then the military gear kind of reaches over into the outdoor world. And as my interest of airsoft faded, I got kind of back into my survival stuff, which led to this idea of not just a survival channel, but everyday tactical vids. So the word tactical in its dictionary definition means gaining an advantage. And so my question was, what tools, resources, skills can I bring to the table to gain advantage in everyday life? I'm not jumping out of helicopters. I'm not a Navy SEAL, but if I've got a med kit in my car and somebody gets hurt, I might be able to help them. If I've got a skill set of how to stay alive in the woods, if I get lost, well, maybe I'll be able to stay alive and get out as opposed to ending up as a casualty. So it kind of evolved. And as I was doing the airsoft stuff in the podcast, I started to jump into YouTube just to mess around, and then went into the everyday tactical vid stuff online. And then it was probably the better part of 2-3 years. And then one day I walked up to my wife and handed her $500 cash. And she was like, "What is this from?" And I said, "Well, it took me 3 years, but I made $500 on YouTube." And she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's crazy." And then as I started to engage with YouTube more, I sort of learned the algorithm and the systems and how those things worked. And then it started to expand, quite a bit more. And it's pivoted over the year by the nature of what social media does and how much time and effort you're willing to put into it. But it really started as just like a side hobby of playing airsoft, and then led into this. And now I've been doing this for over a decade. So strange roads that we travel sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I love just hearing those close friendships that you have and just how you guys stay consistent to stay connected. Yeah, you might have already kind of answered some of this, but how has your Christian faith just shaped this passion? I mean, there's a lot of EDC YouTubers out there, but you're clear you're a believer, and obviously these things go together. And so I'd love to just hear kind of how some of your biblical convictions, shape that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately for me, right, it's this is an opportunity for me to, at a high level, to worship God through things I enjoy, right? So I like learning about things, and so I can honor God in that process. Spending time out in creation. I was just telling somebody last night, I think, that I heard a gentleman teaching and was mentioning that the correlation between people who live in highly populated, dense cities versus who live in more rural areas, there's a higher level of atheism than there is for people who are living in more rural areas. And I just think there's something about being in the outdoors, which reminds you of how small you are in the infiniteness of God. Whereas if I'm in, and I'm not picking on city people, but if you're in a city, you're looking around, you're like, Look what we have made. Look what humans have done. Look how wonderful we are. It's easy to become and make an idol of the capacity of humans. So that's kind of on a high theological level. But when I get to the more practical, tactical side of things, it's like, if I'm prepared well, I can love my neighbors well, right? So after my calling is to first and foremost love God, the outflow of that is I'm going to love others. So that's why I keep a basic med kit on the back of, this headrest and a trauma kit on the back of that kit. And it's not because I'm a medical expert, but if I come across a car accident and some doctor pulls up and goes, I'd really like to help this person, but I don't have the gear, I can go, here you go, doc. I don't know how to use it perfectly, but you definitely do. So here's a tourniquet. Here's all the gear that you might need. And I mean, there's a witness certainly in that. If I'm loving my neighbor well, whether it's believer, non-believer, people ask questions. I've got giveaway in my truck here. I've got my giveaway pocket over there on the passenger door. So if somebody's walking at night, I've got a flashlight, I've got food, I've got hand warmers, I've got a bright orange vest and a bright orange hat. So if someone's walking and maybe I'm not ready to have them hop in the car, or if I got family with me, but I can still give them something and say, this is going to keep you safer than walking in the dark at night, right? And so there's an opportunity to just engage in conversation and see what God does with it. Ultimately we want to get to the gospel with people, but some of that process sometimes is just caring for somebody who maybe otherwise wouldn't be cared for. And so me being more prepared for everyday life allows me to be of assistance to others, trusting that God will use that in whatever ways he chooses. And then the YouTube platform is, social media can be a really dark place.
Mm-hmm.
So when you bring some light, some kindness, some generosity to that place, I think it lovingly messes people up, because they're like, well, why are you being nice about it? The different platforms allow you to do that, and there is something as simple as, I think about years ago, my wife and I were talking, we spoke at a marriage conference, and I said, one of the things we said to the group was, like, just a basically healthy marriage is a witness to the world, because the world's such a broken place. And so just not being a jerk on social media, people kind of don't know what to do with that these days, because it's such a nasty environment. So when you're kind, when you're caring,
Mm-hmm.
and you respond to messages and say, hey, thanks for that feedback, or you're right, I didn't talk about the feature on that flashlight, I probably should have done that, thanks for the heads up. People are just weirded out by that, versus going like, hey, I'm the expert, how dare you question me? But to be like, we're all growing and learning, that becomes an opportunity for a conversation. So God works in all kinds of ways through this.
Dude, Tim, you and I are cut from a very similar cloth. I am neck deep into the
Is that
airsoft
right?
world. Air. Oh yeah, I got a Crytek War Sport. I love it. It's heavy as mess, but I love it. And you get to connect with people out on the airsoft field. From every walk of life, you know, and just connect and look at gear and whatever. And I got a Tops knives on my vest right here, and like anyway, I love it. But I was really curious. I get branded as this prepper, like a post-apocalyptic, pre-apocalyptic prepper. Do you deal with that? Like, because you're a Christian and you know that it works. The war ultimately is already won, but Christ is going to return. And how does that play into your prepping and like maybe even the discussions with people? And it's like, you know what? I prep for a lot of things, but ultimately Jesus wins. Like, can you speak to that? And I'm sure you engage with that as people find out.
Yeah, I try to stay away from the word prepper or the word survivalist, because a lot of people connect those two things, and in their mind they mean bunker in the backyard. I got everything prepared for the end of the world. I tend theologically, I love apologetics, right? And so that process of defending the faith and thinking about things in a rational, clear way, that trickles out into all different areas of my life. So yeah, on a day-to-day level, part of the reality for me is to go, like, I live in a town of 7,000 people. I'm an hour from Boston. The chance that there's going to be major riots in my town is pretty low. So why am I spending my time and efforts thinking about those types of things? First off, it's probably not a reality for me. Second of all, it's a pretty terrible situation if everything goes to pot and I need to worry about, defending my family and defending my stores and things like that. And I think I want to live with the likelihood of what's going to happen in this life, which is like, there's going to be a big storm. And so that's what I need to be prepared for. There's going to be somebody with a flat tire. That's what I want to be prepared for. And I'd like to gently push people to say there's nothing wrong with being prepared if something goes poorly, but prepare for the most likely thing, not the thing that's like, hey, it would be great if there was a zombie apocalypse. I'm like, we are living in two different worlds when you think that's going to be the one that's going to be happening. So I like to gently push back to people and just say, like, there's nothing wrong with being prepared, but okay, first of all, what good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? So is your soul prepared? Are you on Team Jesus? That's the most important thing. Secondly, if I'm called to lay down my life, my preparation should not be how do I keep those people off my lawn. My preparation should be how do I love those who I'm immediately responsible for, family, and then beyond that, how do I sacrificially love others? And that's pretty weird in the prepping community because everyone's like, I got to defend my property, and I'm like, I should do all I can to invite people to my property if things go down, because I want to be of assistance to others. Now, again, there's a fine line of like, I don't want to do that if someone's going to hurt my family and all those types of things. But again, the bottom line for me is I try to live in a realistic scenario, not in a, well, it'd be really cool if this whole thing blew up. And like, I just don't think people think about how dark it would be if laws went out the window, if the supply chain fell apart. Like, some people dream of that, and that's really a nightmare if you actually deeply think about it. It's not a situation that any of us want.
You said earlier that, and I agree with you, in the more rural areas tend to be more spiritually minded. Do you hang out with other YouTube influencers like in the area of like EDC? Do you hang out with those guys? And if you do, like, does it turn spiritual for you, or do they experience that same spiritual experience, I guess?
So yeah, I've built relationships over the years. It's an interesting thing that, so pretty consistently, and I've been going with my wife in more recent years, but I've gone out to SHOT Show, which is the shooting hunting outdoor trade show in Las Vegas. It's like the 6th biggest show that they have out there. It's just absolutely massive. When I've gone out there, I've stayed with Christian brothers who I've met through various platforms. This last handful of years, I've gone with my wife. My experience at SHOT Show is where I connect with a lot of the other outdoor survival EDC YouTubers. And that world it's really interesting because I feel like it's sort of one end to the other. It's like I've met a lot of solid Christian brothers. And then on the other end, I'll go to a booth to talk to them about a new backpack, and they'll like hand me an invitation to like, hey, come to this strip club tonight. And I'm like, nah, I think I'm all set on that. So, I mean, it feels like it's one end or the other, honestly. So I've made connections with a lot of solid believers who are trying to be an influence for Christ in this community, in various ways. And then on the other end, people who just seem very, kind of distant and unplugged from any spiritual life. It is fun. I mean, this is just a side hustle for me with YouTube. So as a pastor, eventually, if I'm at a booth long enough talking, they'll be like, so are you a full-time YouTuber? And I'll be like, no, actually, I'm a pastor at a church in my town. And you can see their eyes get real wide, and they're like, you can see them going through their mind, going like, oh man, how many times did I swear in this conversation? Am I in trouble with this guy? So I'm like, it's good, man. I've lived in the world for a while. I understand how, like, what's going on. So I'm not condoning it, but like, I'm not going to put you on my bad list, so, but I do find, I mean, there's a lot of guys who are in this world who are committed Christians and are also interested in thinking about survival, EDC, and also because YouTube and the other social media platforms have become a means to pay the bills. There's some guys who just jump into it like, this is my job and I'm a Christian, but this is what I do full time as I test product, review products, work with different companies. So it's really an interesting dichotomy. And I think SHOT Show shows it in a very clear way. And it's also just weird to be in Las Vegas because Vegas is a very odd town, just spiritually dark. And yet there's a lot of Christian ministry that's happening there. So it feels like the whole thing is a dichotomy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Do you have like one influencer or something that you really connect with that you're like, this guy speaks my language?
Yeah, I've worked with Ben Peterson. He's from NAFS, KNAFS.com. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Ben's a committed Mormon, and we have theological differences, obviously. But we've just built a great relationship over the years. And it's fun because we get together and we'll bat things around on the business level. We'll bat things around on the gear level, and we'll bat things around on the spiritual level. And this past year, my wife and I went out, and we met him and his wife and spent a lot of time with him. We went to a Cirque du Soleil show. We went out to dinner together. So he's been a great friend over the years, and he's very entrepreneurial, big thinker, loves people. So he's just a fun guy to be around in this community. And again, while we have significant theological differences on some things, he's a genuinely like wonderful person to be around. So he's also in the same place of like, how do I love people, treat people kindly, honor people, and not just turn them into a business proposition to make me more money for my company. So we've built good connections over the years. And then David from Ultimate Survival Tips, he's not as active on YouTube anymore, but he was one of the first bigger influencers. And Brian from Survival on Purpose, deeply committed Christian, lives down in Georgia. And some of these guys tend over into the firearms world a little bit, which I tend away from just because I'm by no means an expert and I don't want to try to speak into something, especially as significant as firearms. Like cutting yourself with a Swiss Army knife is different than trying to teach somebody how to use a gun and doing it poorly. So I don't want to mess with that world really. So.
Well, Tim, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I mean, one thing I did want to ask you is we're talking about being YouTube influencers. I mean, this is something obviously that is growing in popularity, and we have students that are considering this, and we have parents that are listening to this, youth workers that are listening. Maybe just some advice for people wanting to pursue YouTube, either as kind of a part-time thing as you're doing or a full-time thing. Just what's some thoughts there as a Christian trying to do this?
Yeah, I mean, let me just say real quick, if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm glad to have that conversation. They can email me and you can share my stuff, whatever platforms you guys are using to do that. But everydaytacticalvids@gmail.com. And I'm glad to talk to parents or students about that in more depth if it's helpful. A couple of high-level observations. One is that when my wife was home with our kids when they were very young, she still is home with them, but YouTube allowed us to not have to have her get a separate job to help pay the bills. So that was a gift. From that point to now, my YouTube income has dropped about 90%. So it is significantly less than it was. At this point, it's nice to have a little extra spending cash at the end of the month, but it's not something that we're, doing a car payment or a mortgage payment or anything like that. So it has definitely shifted. I think what YouTube has seen also is that they can get people to give them a lot of time and effort. And those are the people that I think they're more focused on as opposed to somebody trying to do it as a side hustle. You can do it as a side hustle and make money from it, but that money is significantly less than if you're doing it full time. And the platform, I think, is built towards people who want to really invest a lot of time in it. So that's just a heads up as people get into it. Mm-hmm. The second thing I think is it's really easy to grab your phone, shoot a video, pop it up on YouTube and be like, look, I'm a YouTuber. If you're going to move in the direction of doing that professionally or trying to make some significant income from it, it's a lot of work and you have to put the time in. It's not, there's a lot of things out there. I see it on Instagram all the time. So 2 hours a day and you can make all this money. And I'm like, maybe after you work for 5 years, putting in tons of time, you can do it for 2 hours a day. So I would just give a heads up to people. I don't know anybody who does it well who isn't putting in significant time. And right now what I'm finding is that the algorithm is definitely driven towards how can you grab people's attention with, and I wouldn't even just say clickbait, but negativity sells, outrage sells. And so to be very balanced and trying to be helpful and kind of have a calmness of spirit, it's not super popular on YouTube, just candidly. There's a lot of platforms, a lot of people out there on the platform that are doing good work, but it takes a while to build to the place where you're like, I can really do this full time. I read a stat recently, it's something like 40% of kids 16 and under want to be a full-time YouTuber. Wow. It's something absolutely insane, the number. And I'm like, if you can do it for the sake of the kingdom, great. But it is hard work. It's not just like, I just, throw up a video and now I'm going to make tons of money. And then the other just piece of advice I would give is that YouTubers who become successful have learned to diversify what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So the way YouTube works is I'll put a video up, YouTube will match through their algorithm, match me with an advertiser and either put the ad in the video somewhere or along the side. That's all the work they do. And then if, say, advertiser X has paid $1,000 of advertising to YouTube, and I'll get $1.50 because my video is this long and here's how much time they got. That's one small way that people are making money on YouTube, but the majority of people are doing that and also selling t-shirts. YouTubers who are being successful at what they're doing now are using YouTube and the other social media platforms as platforms. And then they're saying, hey, I'll work with this company, and that company will pay me $1,000 a year to put a commercial in my video. I'll work with that company, and they'll do affiliate sales. And so if I sell one of their products, I'll get some money from there. So wise YouTubers are diversifying their income, so they're not just banking on YouTube alone. And I'm not like a end of the world guy tomorrow, but like if the platform changes and it shifts and something happens where it's less friendly to certain environments or certain content, you have to be ready to pivot out of that. And so if you have all your eggs in the YouTube is my only place I'm going to get paid from, if something goes sideways, if your internet connection breaks like ours has, like all of a sudden you're like, okay, what am I going to do? So you really need to think in a diverse way, because it's not just like I'm a teacher, I go to school, I work 7 to 3, and then I go home and I get my paycheck every 2 weeks. In the social media world, you got to be thinking across all the different platforms and different ways to engage.
Yeah, now that's just helpful. And I mean, as you said, just the more I've been around students, the more you hear them talk about potentially doing this as a career. And this is something that many parents haven't really thought about, and is just something that's still kind of new that they're having to warm up to. And so it's just something as Christians, as youth workers, as parents, how we can help prepare future generations that might be looking into this. So Tim, look, I know you need to go pick up kids, and you have really just, I appreciate you taking the time, because as we've joked offline, the connection hasn't been the best, and it's gone in and out, but you've been a trooper sticking with us and getting through this interview. So just appreciate your time today and appreciate what you're doing.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you. And again, if I can be a help to somebody who wants to talk about or dig into that social media world, glad to do that. If it's helpful for you guys too, separate from the survival stuff, if it would be helpful to have somebody share about those social media platforms, how to leverage them for the kingdom, we could do something in the future. I don't want to reinvite myself to your podcast because I've been a headache for you guys already, but if at some point in the future that would be helpful, glad to be a resource. So.
No, I really appreciate you offering that, and definitely want to tell everybody to check out Everyday Tactical Vids, and I will also put this in the show notes where people can reach out to you. But Tim, Chris, thanks again for taking the time to be on today.